welcome. You're watching the Business Today show with me, Sakshi Batra. First up, the top news we're tracking for you tonight. Market snapped 6-day winning streak. Reliance Industries and IT stocks led by Infosys drag indices down. Sensex loses 888 points. Nifty fails to cross the 20,000 mark and instead falls 234 points. Huge sell-off in Infosys a day after the IT bellwether shocks the street with a big cut in its yearly revenue guidance. Stock down more than 8%. Investors lose 46,000 crore rupees. Aviation regulator DGCA allows Go First to resume flights but puts up conditions. Says the airline has to first ensure funding and get the required air operator certificate. Airline reportedly plans to restart operations with 22 aircraft. Darwin Platform Infrastructure wins the bid for Lavasa for 1,814 crore rupees. NCLT gives final approval to the resolution plan, says Darwin chairman Ajay Harinath Singh. Adds the township will now be known as Darwin's Lavasa. Deep dive into the biggest challenges facing Indian startups as funds dry up. Is the Indian story losing its sheen? It's an India Today magazine special. First, the big corporate news of the day. The big daddy of Dalal Street, Reliance Industries, has declared its results. India's most valuable company and second largest in terms of weightage to the Nifty, Reliance Industries, had fallen more than 3% in trade today, with analysts expecting a drop in performance. Now, I earlier spoke to market analysts about the results, and here's an excerpt.
Crude oil prices globally have fallen about 31% and year-on-year and 3% sequentially. Since oil to chemicals is the mainstay of Reliance Industries, therefore there is a fall in net profit as also a marginal dip in revenue. So revenue for the first quarter is 2,07,000 crores versus 2,19,000 crores a year ago. Now come to the operational part of the business, which is operating profit, EBITDA. EBITDA has risen, and I'll give you the reasons why it has risen. Both EBITDA actual and EBITDA margin are up because the other two businesses, which is telecom and retail, are kicking in very sharply.
Your thoughts on the earnings? Have they met your expectations or are they above your expectations?
I would say there are positives and negatives. On the positive side, we should see the B2C side of the business, which is exceeded our estimates. We were expecting our retail EBITDA to be below 4,900 odd crore. It has beat our estimate by 4.5%. While digital side of the business also our estimates, if you see the Geo numbers were there earlier, and they have beaten our estimates by at least 350 or 400 crores. The ARPUs was 176 odd. The numbers is not yet out, but I think those numbers are there right now. So that is consumer side of business, which has done exceptionally well. Given the current scenario we are in right now, those numbers have done very well for the company right now. On the sales side also, retails they have exceeded our expectations. I believe the complete hike, like some of the hikes they have taken in some of the industry, and they are going to be, the impact is going to be seen in going forward. ARPUs are going to see a stable rise. On the OTC side, definitely there are some disappointments. On the PVC side, PVC deltas were slightly negative, petchem side also. So that is actually some disappointments are there right now. GRMs are, they don't announce the GRM numbers, but I think numbers looks interesting, and on overall basis, the EBITDA is slightly below our estimates. But I would like to give a thumbs up on the news that the B2C business has done very well.
Domestic equity markets crashed sharply today on the back of profit booking, particularly after muted Q1 earnings by Infosys and HUL. Traders took some money off the table ahead of the June quarter results of Reliance Industries. Sharp sell-off in the index heavyweights weighed on the market sentiments after a stellar secular rally of the past 6 days. For the day, BSE's barometer, Sensex tanked 888 points to end the session at 66,684. The NSE's Nifty 50 plunged 234 points to settle the day at 19,745. The top Nifty gainers were L&T, ONGC, NTPC, SBI and Tata Motors, while the top laggards were Infosys, HUL, HCL Technologies, Wipro and TCS. Infosys was the biggest villain of the stock markets today. It fell nearly 10% as soon as the trading began on the D Street this morning, and it also pulled down the other IT stocks with it. Not only that, the fall in Infosys ensured that Nifty could not rendezvous with 20,000 mark as many had expected. So why did it fall so much? Here's a report.
The iconic bull at the entrance to the equally, if not more iconic Bombay Stock Exchange Tower at Dalal Street in Mumbai. Investors and traders passing by every day hope to be blessed by its charge on the street. Friday morning, the bull had clearly abandoned the Infosys counter. The stock had a gap down opening this morning, falling nearly 10% as soon as trading began. It managed to recover a little and touched an intraday high of 1,350 before closing the day 8% down at 1,332. The signs of the fall were clear since last night when the IT bellwether's ADR at New York Stock Exchange fell 8.4% after the company's disappointing FY24 revenue guidance. Infosys had cut its revenue growth guidance for the present fiscal to 1 to 3.50% from 4 to 7% earlier. The company attributed it to a distinct stopping and slowing down in some verticals. Infosys had also posted lower net profits sequentially. Brokerages have been quick to revise their targets for the Infosys stock. Nomura cut Infosys target price by 50 rupees to 1,210 rupees. IDBI Capital cut the price by 178 rupees to 1,440 rupees. Nirmal Bank cut Infosys FY24 EBIT margin by 30 basis points to 20.7%. Motilal Oswal also slashed the EBIT margin by 60 basis points to 20.5%. IIFL Securities predicted the stock may fall below 1,300 in near term. Kotak Institutional Equities said the revision warrants a closer scrutiny. The sentiment clearly rubbed off on other IT stocks as well. The NSE IT index was the biggest loser today, crashing more than 3% with companies like Persistent, Wipro and HCL Tech among the other big wealth destroyers. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
The fall in Infosys shares was particularly devastating for the British First Lady. Akshata Murthy saw her wealth fall by more than 560 crore rupees this morning. Murthy, who is the daughter of Infosys founder N.R. Narayana Murthy and also the wife of British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, is one of the biggest shareholders of Infosys. As of 31st of March, she held 3.89 crore shares or 1.07% of the total paid-up capital of Infosys, with Infosys stock falling by 145 rupees at one point. In trade today, Akshata Murthy was poorer by 565 crore rupees. She was, however, able to recover some of the notional loss, ending the day with her wealth also down. Well, India's startup ecosystem, the third largest in the world after US and China, is one staring at it's one of the biggest challenges yet. Byju's, Swiggy, Ola, Pine Labs, you name them. We have seen all of them who had become the shining stars of the startup ecosystem have now seen their valuations plunge in the past about a year. A double whammy of sorts, slowing revenues and no clear path to profitability on the other side as well. And a fund squeeze, on the other hand, has also put the Indian startups under enormous pressure. Mr. M.G. Arun now joins in, the executive editor of India Today magazine and the author of this article on what lies ahead for the Indian startup ecosystem. Welcome, Mr. Arun, and thank you so much for taking the time out. Well, first up, help our viewers understand the key reasons for the shakedown in the startup sector in India.
Sakshi, of course, there are quite a few reasons for this. We all know that when the pandemic hit us in March 2020, the tech apps were the go-to for a lot of people. I mean, everybody was staying indoors, everything was shut. So, you know, naturally, there was a huge boom in the usage of most of these tech applications, you know, be it your ordering food online, or be it, you know, ordering your groceries, or even the education sector. In fact, one of the biggest beneficiaries of the pandemic has been the edutech sector. Because everything was shifted online. You had online classes because students can't afford to miss it.
Yeah.
So from that kind of a scenario, once the pandemic was over, you know, we started to feel the pressure. During the pandemic, there was a huge fund flow which came in from the US, from Europe, because we all know that US itself pumped in some $5 trillion into its economy to stimulate it.
Sure.
And Europe also pumped in some, you know, $865 billion. Now, all this money, the availability of cheap money was a big boon for these startups, and investors pumped in these money into the emerging markets. But once the pandemic was over, you know, the economies, the big economies of the world were stuck with one of the biggest threats of this kind of loose you know, cash flow, and that is inflation. So high inflation again forced the central banks to raise interest, which made money very, very costly. And when money becomes costly and it finds itself better to be parked in certain debt instruments rather than equity, so these money flowed back into the US and Europe and from the emerging markets. So startups all on a sudden became on the one hand, you know, they were caught between a dwindling business, a dwindling demand, and on the other side, they were all on a sudden caught up in a funds crunch.
Fair point. Mr. Arun, also if you could share some insights on how the valuations of these top startups in India have also fallen in the recent past, and why exactly are top investors doing a sharp markdown in their valuations too?
Yeah, that has been one of the hallmarks of this, Sakshi, you know, where we have seen some of the top investors mark down the Indian startups. For instance, the Byju's valuation. Byju, of course, was a decacorn till recently, but from $22 billion, it has now been marked down to $5.1 billion by one of its top investors process. Now, what has happened is that when the education segment, when the edutech segment within the startup ecosystem, everything was online, then they had a lot of you know, demand. There was so much of interest from investors, but now children are back in schools, except for certain segments of the edutech. You know, it is not a fair game for the edtech startups themselves. So it is only natural that there would be a shift in focus for the investors from the edutech segment. And you know, we have seen even other startups going through a lot of correction. We have seen Swiggy's valuation being you know, corrected. We have seen Ola Cabs being marked down. Now, it is natural that when there is a funds crunch overall, you know, that investors will be much more sharp, and they will make very, very sensible decisions. They would want to do a lot of due diligence, and they would only invest wherever they are seeing a lot of profitability and performance. And that is what led to this this kind of markdown in valuations, and it is a warning signal to all these startups.
Absolutely. And Mr. Arun, not long ago in the COVID period, India was registering new unicorns every few days on the back of billions of dollars that you also pointed out that they were raising. Now, Indian startups have just managed to raise about $3.8 billion in the first half of 2023, and this is the lowest half-yearly funding in the last 4 years. Why are they suddenly staring at a funding crunch, and is this funding winter here to stay?
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. You know, we have seen how the funding has increased in the startup ecosystem over the past few years. In 2019, the total amount that Indian startups got was around 13.2 billion. It fell a little bit during the COVID, the first year of COVID in 2020 to 10.9, but thereafter it soared to 35.2 billion in 2022. Now, from there, it has taken a dip to $22 billion in 2022. And now this year it's going to be quite bad. I mean, that is what we are hearing from you know, the industry as such. The PwC India report, which they have released recently, shows that in the first half of this year, just $3.8 billion has come in. Now, if that is the rate at which you know, the funding happens, then we'll be seeing maybe around $12 billion or even less. That is what some of these investors say, into the country. So that means there is going to be there is already a funding winter, and the reason for it is precisely what I was trying to say, that you know, investors are going to be very, very careful. There is an overall funds crunch. The limited partners who sort of, you know, put in their money into these private equity funds, they are a lot more cautious. They are asking a lot more questions. In India, we have seen how companies have gone through certain very, very questionable governance processes. We have seen how companies have squandered the money. We have seen some of the startup promoters behaving very, very irresponsibly. And I'm not really taking names here, but it is out there in the public domain, how some of these startup companies have really squandered money. And we know that you know, startups in general have gone through an exuberance where, you know, some of them hire at very, very fancy salaries, you know, without you know, applying the right kind of due diligence when they take in people. And it's anyway, it's free cash. So when you have free cash, then, you know, you tend to waste it. I mean, that is a general tendency, and that is exactly what has happened. Now, the reverse is now going to happen. The funds are not cheap. The availability is not there as before. So there will be a more judicious way of putting this money into this, and that is why the funds crunch is going to be there.
That's what the hope is, Mr. Arun. Many thanks for being with us on the show and sharing all these insights. That will be very helpful for all the viewers who are concerned with the things that are happening with the startup ecosystem in India and what to look forward from here on.
Okay, thank you so much, Sakshi.
Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has warned of higher inflation due to pressures on the agri sector. Speaking on the sidelines of the CBIC event in Guwahati this morning, the Finance Minister said all efforts were being made to ensure that all goods were available at affordable prices. She said a synthesis paper on crypto guidelines was also under preparation.
On being the fastest growing economy and also making sure that all sectors of the economy are equally given enough attention and stimulus, I think the results are showing. There could be inflationary pressures because of the agricultural outputs, or because specifically on perishable goods. So now there are efforts being taken by the government to make sure that they are available in affordable rates, even the perishable goods. But I'm sure India will continue to maintain its momentum on growth. On the crypto assets, there is a synthesis paper which is awaited. A synthesis of the IMF and the FSB's reports looking at macroeconomic issues and also on regulatory issues. That will be submitted to the presidency before the leaders summit, and then it will get circulated. So I'm sure there will be good discussions on that as well. It is going in the way of a global understanding on having to regulate the crypto. So after the synthesis report, we'll get something.
In a big outreach towards Sri Lanka, India has decided to carry out feasibility studies on establishing a land bridge and petroleum pipeline between the two countries, addressing a joint press conference after a bilateral with Sri Lankan President Ranil Wickremesinghe. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also announced that an agreement has been reached to launch UPI in the island nation.
हम भारत और श्रीलंका के बीच हवाई कनेक्टिविटी बढ़ाने के लिए सहमत है। व्यापार और लोगों का आवागमन बढ़ाने के लिए तमिलनाडु के नागपट्टनम और श्रीलंका के कांके संतुरई के बीच पैसेंजर फेरी सर्विसेज शुरू करने का निर्णय भी लिया गया है। हमने तय किया है कि दोनों देशों के बीच इलेक्ट्रिसिटी ग्रिड्स को कनेक्ट करने के काम को तेजी से आगे बढ़ाया जाएगा। भारत और श्रीलंका के बीच पेट्रोलियम पाइपलाइन के लिए फिजिबिलिटी स्टडी की जाएगी। इसके अलावा एक लैंड ब्रिज की फिजिबिलिटी को भी जांचने का निर्णय लिया गया। आज श्रीलंका में यूपीआई को लॉन्च करने के लिए हुए समझौते से फिनटेक कनेक्टिविटी भी बढ़ेगी।
All right, and with that, we'll wrap up this special edition for all of you. Many thanks for staying on, but do stay tuned on to India Today as well to catch all the latest news from the world of general news as well.